Hey, guys. We're live right now.
Good afternoon, teacher. How are you?
Oh, good afternoon for you, teacher Will. I'm doing pretty awesome. And what about yourself?
I'm doing well. I'm doing
Oh,
really well.
that is a great, you kind of a clockwise kind of a guy. I like that. You're a kind of a guy.
Thank
I
you so
like
much.
that. But pretty much clockwise. I love that. I love that.
I
I
appreciate
really,
that.
I really
Brother,
love
listen,
that,
let
Will.
let me before we even get started, and I want you to introduce yourself to the ATW family.
Oh,
But before I even
absolutely.
do that, let me just thank you very much for inviting me to your live Instagram. I appreciate it. I believe in collaboration, and I think I'm really excited talking about today's topic.
Awesome.
So oftentimes I don't get invited by fellow colleagues, so I appreciate the invitation. And hello, let me just introduce myself real quick, and then certainly do it there. Hey, everybody! Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, teacher. My name is Teacher Will. I happen to be from the United States of America. My native language is English. That's great. Some of y'all care more than I do, because last time I looked, English is a global international language. So before I was a teacher, I was in the business world, and I'm American. I currently live in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where I teach face to face and I teach online. And the ATW family knows this, is I kind of have a couple themes that I really believe in. And as it relates to English, it's kind of like motivation, inspiration. It starts within.
Yeah.
Certainly, people can be motivated by teachers or they can be motivated by a nice day. But I think that certainly if somebody wants to learn English, that motivation, that inspiration starts from within. And then the last motto that I think is really, really important is that we learn together. So I think that's the beautiful thing about social media and also just in life, in my own life. It's kind of like the process of learning together. So again, teacher, thank you very much for inviting me. And for those people that don't know you, please
Absolutely.
introduce yourself.
I just want to say, I just want to say the pleasure. It is absolutely all mine. That's all I want to say to you. The pleasure is absolutely all mine. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alder Malinger. I tend to accidentally be, I'm Angolan, actually. I was born in Angola. I don't have English as my native language, but I do have English as my official language because English, I like to say official language because English came to my life accidentally, so to speak, because I was born in Angola. And I was born in Angola in the times of war. And somehow my family had to move to an English speaking country. So that is the reason why I said that I accidentally, that is the reason why I said accidentally, I tend to have English as my, I like to say first language or primary language. I don't like to call myself as a native speaker because I wasn't born in an English speaking country. So I was born in Angola, Africa, and I'm an English professor for about 20, I would say 20 something, yeah, 20 plus years. And I live in Brazil for 14 years now. That is the place where I started to to work on my journey as an English professor. And I gotta say to you, teacher Will, I need to start by saying there is a crazy thing that happens when I came across your Instagram, and I want to quote my wife because I'm a great man. I want to quote my
Okay.
wife. Will please allow me to do that if you will, okay?
Of course. We give deference to
Allow me,
sisters. We give deference to sisters.
yeah, but allow me to quote my wife. Allow me to quote my wife, if you will. See that? I got jokes. Allow me to quote my wife, if you will. My wife has a quote that she says, Elder, you inspire people that they barely know that you exist. And this is basically what happens to you and to me, Mr. Professor Will. Uh, I will say to you, I came across your Instagram profile and I said to myself, wow, wow. I said to myself, for the first time, as an English professor for 20 years, and I came across your Instagram profile, I definitely, you inspired me so much. I was like one of those guys who are just watching you, I was just watching you on the corner. But this such inspiration that you brought to my life, I would say I would have no adjectives to express how grateful I am to your life right now. Later on, you are going to understand exactly what I'm saying when I say how grateful I am to come across to your profile. And the reason why I said that I need to say that to you before we get started, I just want to say that to you, Teacher Will. For the first time, I found a guy who was speaking something that I've been speaking for the past almost 20 years. And I've came across to a person who was bringing a message that I used to say, but it somehow, living in Brazil and working this Brazilian language market, I don't see every day people who look like me doing what I'm doing. And for the first time, I came across to you, Teacher Will, and I say, wow, there is a man who I could somehow have some sort of a reference, if I may say that. There was some sort of a reference, and for me, it was like, wow. And for the first time, I started to follow you, and I was watching your videos and everything. I say, this man, I need to get in touch with this man, because I'm gonna prove to people who follow me that I'm not a fraud, because I need to have a conversation with this. I need to have a conversation with this teacher, because your message somehow and accidentally, it is something that I've been preaching for the past almost 20 years, Teacher Will. That is the reason why I just want to say thank you so much, because you
Well,
have been
thank you, brother. You know what, brother? I mean, we're both teachers, but no, thank you, and I respect that, and I'm humbled by that. What I would say is that this message, in terms of, when we're talk about it more in detail, in terms about language and culture,
mm-hmm.
what I would certainly say is that, again, thank you. I'm humbled by that. I'm very appreciative about that. This message that you've been teaching, and certainly you've been teaching longer than I have. You've been in it 20 years. It'll be a decade next year for me. But I think this message, in terms of the fact of that, how language can, the English language is global. The English language is universal. It's
Mm-hmm.
one of the languages. It's one of the international languages. But this message, I think, in terms of its inclusivity,
Mm-hmm.
the language that it's available for all people, I think is that, it's been around there. So I certainly would not be, taking credit for that. I mean, I am based on the ancestors, based on the experiences that I have. And if I'm able to, I'm definitely aware of the fact that there are people like you and other people out there that, have had this similar message. And so that's the first thing. I mean, I'm not the first, nor will I be the last, and I certainly hope I wouldn't be the last.
You are
The
the
second thing that
first
I
one that came across. That's what I meant.
Okay, okay, got it. I respect that, brother. And I
You are the
think the
first one
second
that
thing that
came
I would
across to
say,
me.
yeah, no, I think the second thing that I would say is that, because English is a global international language, and many people from around the world, whether it's in Brazil, whether it's in America, whether it's in Saudi Arabia, and where we have other learners joining, it is the aspect, whereas it's kind of like, a lot of times when people think of English, they think of English as one particular region, one particular accent, one particular color. And that's not to
Mm-hmm.
negate the fact that English does not have its origins from Britain or the rest of the United Kingdom, because
Mm-hmm.
certainly it does. And yet the language has expanded. And so in the social media realm, oftentimes you have teachers out there from different walks of life, different cultures, different ethnicities, different races. To be honest with you, I think that one of the thing is that, and I'm actually honored and humbled to talk to you. I remember when I started my social media journey, I didn't see a lot of teachers that look like you and I.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
not to say that does not.
That's the reason why.
Yeah, I mean, that's not to say that that does not exist. I mean, certainly there are people, that started, but to be honest with you, I remember I started my social media journey, and I'm like, okay, well, I know I'm not the only black teacher out there. And that's not to negate my other brothers and sisters. But I think that's what important is, and I say this a lot to the ATW family. If language is a global international language, one of the things that I've tried to do in terms of
Mhm.
my platform, as limited as it is to recognize and represent the diversity of the language. And
Absolutely.
oftentimes, I think what happens is that when people think language or when then people think English, respectfully, they're
Mhm.
thinking British accent, American accent.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
They're
Mhm.
thinking one particular color that happens to be Caucasian or European, and there's nothing
Absolutely.
against that because
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have that in my blood, right? And
Beautiful.
so
Yes.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think what's important is what I've tried to say to the ATW family is that representation becomes important. Why? Because English is a global international language,
So there
and
you go.
so people,
Well,
yeah, I mean, people certainly can have a preference. I have no problem in terms of preference. Like some people might prefer women teachers, or some people might prefer American teachers or
mm,
Brazilian teachers, whatever of that nature. But I think what's important for learners to understand is this: most of our colos that are learning the language, their native language is not English,
yeah. Yeah.
and that's fine. I mean, I did a video on YouTube saying like, "Yo, English is not your, if you're not." Some people found my video on YouTube to be controversial, but they have their opinions. It's kind of like, yo, um, we live in an environment, whether it's right or wrong, perceptions of reality.
Mhm.
Whereas I said to the learners, I was like, yo, if you're not a native English speaker, you know what? That's okay. Be proud of who you are. And so
Absolutely.
hopefully with my channel, your channel, other people's channel out there is that we give people at least my one of my jobs or one of my passions is to give people hope, inspiration that you know what that you can be represented in the language, that you can use English regardless of where you come from, what you
Yeah.
look like, your race or ethnicity. It is possible. Now, reality, does that mean that a person might have certain challenges that somebody else might not have?
Exactly.
Certainly, we all have challenges. We all
Absolutely.
have challenges for whatever reason. We're all privileged for whatever reason, whether it's our gender, whether it's our race, whether it's our ethnicity, whether it's our class. But what's important to me, a part of the component, hopefully, that the ATW family that gets is representation becomes important.
There you go, teacher Will.
It
There
is
you go.
extremely important.
There you go. That is actually that was one of the first things that caught my attention when I came across your Instagram. That is the reason why I'm definitely I'm stressing so much on that matter, because when I came across to your Instagram profile, I loved you for so many reasons. One of the reasons that I loved you was the fact that you are preaching something that I believe, and somehow it is something that I've been preaching for the past. I've been that has been the core of my teaching message, so to say, and that has been the core of my work, of my life work. And that is exactly, I'm gonna get into that because I've prepared some of the questions that I would like you to help me. I know that somehow, probably or certainly, your family it's already in common with such questions, but I'm bringing these questions to also to my family, to people who follow me, who somehow they were not so familiar. They're not so familiar, especially when you're talking about culture, language, all these sort of things. I've selected some questions. I mean, not so many of them, but quite of them. Just to for you to help me out, so that just you can somehow help people who follow me to understand the message that somehow I've been teaching all these years. Because
Sure, brother. Ask your questions. I mean, we'll share, we'll collaborate, we'll get the learners
absolutely,
involved.
yeah,
Brother,
yeah.
could you just do me a favor and type the, because a couple of the learners were asking. So just learners, we're talking about language and culture.
You
So,
talked about
brother,
language and
if you can just,
stuff. Yeah,
I typed it in. If you can just pin it so
yeah,
they know
yeah,
what
yeah.
it's about.
Okay, okay,
But
okay. Yeah, guys. So, guys, we're definitely talking about language and culture. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Elder Malinger, and I'm an English professor. And I'm Mongolian who accidentally tend to have English as a first language, so to say. And I just I'm gonna call my brother. I'm gonna call my brother my uncle because it's so awesome to have somebody who looks like
thank you.
somebody who, definitely it is definitely it is awesome to have somebody who looks like you who
Oh,
believes.
wow. No, I think it's important. But listen, one of our colleagues, I'm sorry, brother, I know you're going to ask a question, but there's one of our colleagues, he asked a question. I
Mhm.
think it's really good and it's a good segue. He said, do you think that language and culture can be separated?
Mm.
Hey, teacher Malad, that's a really good question. For what it's worth,
Yeah.
I'll give you my perspective on it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Suit yourself.
Me personally, no, I don't leave my culture at the door because I'm trying to learn English. I don't leave the fact that I'm American at the door because I'm trying to learn English. I don't leave the fact that I'm an African American while recognizing I have European in me and I'm of European descent and Native American descent. I don't leave my culture at the door when learning English.
Mm,
Culture is defined by a set of rules, values, systems that I define by myself
mm.
and interpret by myself, and then it's interpreted in terms of the world. So
Exactly.
me personally, I don't believe that I leave my culture at the door.
Mm,
What's interesting is that I do believe that, and I'm your guest, so I need to be respectful. I do believe that sometimes what happens is that because of the English language industry, English as a second language or foreign language, I think what happens is that sometimes students, either consciously or subconsciously,
yeah.
are programmed or conditioned or prompted to leave their culture at the door.
Oh, you
Whether
go.
or not that is from in terms of the content that they look at, whether
Hmm.
it is from social media content, or whether it is from their universities or the language schools that they attend, or even by some teachers. But me personally, no, I don't believe that anyone leaves English, their culture at the door.
Hmm.
And so, Teacher Milan, when you ask the question, so English contains American culture and British culture, I think that's one facet of it. I don't think that, English as a language, it is English, let me put it this way. English does not discriminate, it's people that discriminate. So regardless of the fact if I'm from Brazil, if I'm from Iran, if I'm from Saudi, if I'm from Oman, if I'm from Paraguay, if I'm from China, wherever I am, I bring my culture to the language.
There you go. There you go. That's it. That's yeah, 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 yeah. I
And
do. Yeah.
unfortunately, what happens is I think that learners are programmed, some of them, to only think and believe as though they say, you know what? Well, most of the time when they think English, if I'm learning English, they're thinking a particular accent, and you know what? They're thinking a particular color.
Mm.
And so some of them are prompted to, in terms of they're taught like, okay, well, you know what? I'll use William Land. That way I won't attack anybody. If I'm William Land and people look like this, it's the kind of like, oh no, well, you know what? Well, I'm supposed to sound like with all due respect, I'm supposed to sound like a white American or a British, I'm supposed to sound like a white American or a British person with British accent. I'm sorry, I'm not that. I'm not that.
Yeah.
I'm not that. I'm not negating my brothers and sisters, but I'm not. But again, I think what's important is that what happens is learners have to be responsible for that. The usage of the language needs to change, and learners have an opportunity to realize, like, listen, there's a dynamic. English is a tool of communication, and we use that to communicate our thoughts and ideas. And
Mm.
within that, within the language itself, a person certainly can have preference,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think we need to be
Okay.
mindful of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I will put it. I will put this way. I will put this way, teacher. Well, uh, I leave that. All right. I leave that. When I say I leave that because somehow culture has followed me all the way. Culture has followed me, I would say, all the way. Uh, when I say culture has followed me all the way, it is because, as I told you, I'm an African, I'm an Angolian. As I said, I was born in a non-English speaking country, and then I moved to an English speaking country where I got all my education and somehow. But when in terms of culture, one thing that I've learned on my learning language on my language journey, it is that it entwines. You know, when you learn a language, it's some sort of it entwines. You adapt yourself, the way of communication, because that's what I believe. There's a difference. There's a difference of speaking a language and be able to communicate in a language. You will never be able to communicate with anybody without understanding our culture. There you go, teacher. Look it up. You look it up. So there is a
Brother, could you
difference.
say
There
that
is a
again?
difference.
Can you say that again? Because I think the learners need it. That is a
Oh yeah,
very
oh yeah, oh yeah,
profound
oh yeah, oh yeah.
statement that I don't think people have heard.
What I'm saying is there is absolutely no way for you to learn a language without understanding the perception of a culture, because they are entwined in the sense that you can speak, but you will never be able to communicate effectively without understanding one's culture. The only way to communicate, it is somehow, you know what I'm saying? It is somehow to understand the person's culture. Let me give you an example. I'm an African, right? I'm an African, and I was so blessed to live in the four continents, all right? I was so blessed to live in the four continents. But somehow, English was my primary language of communication. So one of the things that I had to do, each country that I lived, I had to adapt myself with the culture in order for me to be able to communicate with the ones, you know, that I'm, you understand what I mean? So because if I, let's say, hey, I live in Brazil for 40 years. I'm not a Brazilian, right? I'm not a Brazilian. So I live in Brazil for 40 years. And one of the things that I had to do, I had to behave like Brazilian. I had to understand their culture in order for me to create some sort of a way of communicating with them. You know what I'm saying? Or else I would never be married to a Brazilian woman.
That's real talk, bro. But I think what you're saying, bro, is so important because it's real talk. I mean, here I am, and I'm American. I'm an American, and I live in Saudi Arabia, right? So here I am, an English teacher, right? An American teaching a bunch of my primarily base or Saudis or Arabs, right? How am I going to teach English if I don't understand the culture, if I don't understand the nuance? And I think what happens sometimes is that from a global perspective, right? I want to break it from a global perspective and then from the learner's perspective, right? From a global perspective, what happens is that we're only taught that English is supposed to be taught with one particular culture that 90% of the people don't even identify with.
Say that again, teacher Will. Say that again.
I mean, I think if learners are kind of honest, if they're thinking about English with all due respect, they might think of English as I've said, one color, one sound, one accent. And yet, that one color, one accent is not necessarily representative of the vast percentage of learning of who people are that are learning English, right? That's a global sense. So it goes to your point, brother, where it's kind of like, well, wait a minute. If I want to speak the language, I have to communicate to people. I mean, that's the beautiful thing. Language is a tool of communication. If I don't know whom I'm communicating to and know their culture and know the nuance and certain words and phrases and then enunciation could be confirmed as something that is respectful or in other cases disrespectful, how am I going to know that? And then what happens is that learners walk around here thinking like, you know what? Wait a minute. Are you telling me English is a global international language? But most learners are always trying to walk around here sounding like an American with an American accent, which I don't know what that means because there's many different accents. Or are they walking around trying to sound like a Brit with a British accent? Nothing to my American brothers and sisters and my British cousins, but I'm like, really, learners? So that happens I think at a global level because unfortunately or fortunately, respectfully, if one subscribes to the fact that there's native speakerism, right? The native speakerism to me is nothing more than a systematic form of oppression that's oppressing people that are learning the language, right? But that's at a global level.
There you go.
But imagine if we look at it locally. We have people from Brazil, we have people from Sicily, we have people from Iran, we have people from Saudi, right? So imagine this one language that we're trying to, the common tongue, for better lack of terminology, is English. Well, wait a minute. The way that I'm speaking English to my brother here is different because he comes from Africa and I come from America, but he's an African American. So there may be a certain cultural understanding that we have when we speak is different from if I'm speaking with a person from Japan or Oman. So no, culture is interwoven. And oftentimes what learners have, I don't think is that they're only looking at the language from their cultural perspective.
There you go. There's an old quote. I think it's from Charlemagne. All right. There's an old quote from Charlemagne that he says. Charlemagne says, to have a second language, it is like having a second soul. No one can have, to have a second language, it is like to have a second soul. You will never be able to literally and culturally be able to communicate if you do not separate your culture, like to separate your culture from the ones that you have to communicate with. That is the reason why he correlates the sense to learn a second language, it is like having a second soul, which means if I'm speaking with my African people, I express myself differently. You know what I'm saying? So I do live in Brazil. If I'm communicating with my Brazilian, with my Brazilian family, I do have to enter into their culture, their way of communicating. So I mean, I lived in Africa.
And we all do that, doctor, and we all do that. And see, that's the interesting thing. We all do that. So you look at Brazil, right? You look at Brazil. Well, FYI, Brazil has the largest African presence, or those in the Afro diaspora, than we do, right? So I think what's important for learners to understand is we all do that. We all communicate. I mean, if people would expand their horizons of what they think that language should be, when you're communicating to someone, you're communicating in the mode and understanding with the understanding of their culture. We all do that. So one of the things I just find fascinating with some of the learners is when I hear people say, it's like, again, I understand preference. I have no problem with preference, but I find it fascinating when people tell me, it's like, I want to speak like, I want to speak like an American, okay, or I want an American accent. I understand where that comes from, but I'm kind of like, because in certain parts of the world, you have to do that. I mean, the reality is, it's like if you don't have a particular accent, you might not get the job. I'm mindful of that, right? I'm mindful of the discrimination and the bigotry and the racism that exists in the country. But here's the thing: for me, I have to know about another culture. One of the learners asked the question, "Well, how is it that I get to know about somebody else's culture?" It's a really good question. I mean, you have the internet. Maybe you have friends outside of that. I think for me, as someone who grew up in America, that grew up with different races, different cultures, different ethnicities, different religions, different classes or whatever, I might have had more of a propensity to understand that than, say, a country that is more homogeneous. Yep. With that being said, I think if a person if they want to learn about a different culture, I would say 2 quick points. Number one, you have the internet. Number one. Number two, if you have friends outside of your culture, then that's nice. The last point I think would be this, and I think that sometimes people have to take a look in the mirror, is that particularly when learning English, oftentimes, or learning English, and I think a personal perspective of mine, I cannot ask for someone to respect my culture, however I define myself and my culture to be, and not willing to accept somebody else. And I want to be my sense of intellectually honest by recognizing and realizing that everybody in the world does not want to know everybody else's culture. There are certain parts of the world where it might be more of an ability or part of one's values or cultural morals to learn about that. And I think that's important to say, because sometimes how it impacts English is the following. If you are coming from a culture where you have different races, different ethnicities, and things of that nature, and I come from William Land, where most people look like me, act like me, talk like me, dance like me, sing like me, wear the same food, right? Then I think that's important to understand, because oftentimes we're coming at it from a disconnect. And I think what's important is we, at least from my own sense of intellectual honesty, I have to recognize that when we talk about cultural understanding, or when we talk about inclusivity, or when we talk about diversity, everybody in the world don't think like that. And there are parts of the world, if you thought like that, you might not be alive, or you might be dead. If you're considered the other, whatever that other means. And I think that's important to understand and say. And sometimes in English that gets delayed because I have glasses on, we're looking at the world through different lenses. And sometimes that's difficult, particularly imagine, brother, if your native language is French or Arabic or Farsi or Tagalog, and we come from different worlds. Let's say you know how to speak Arabic. No, I'm sorry. Let's say you know how to speak Spanish and I know how to speak Spanish. So we have that commonality, but we come from 2 different worlds. Now imagine that, and now we're trying to learn English.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that is important. But at the end of the day, if you want to understand cultures, I think you have to take a look in the mirror and ask yourself the question, what's the reason? What's your intent? And when, at least for me, when I try to look at another culture, whatever that is, I have to recognize that, okay, I'm biased, and I have to try to remove myself as possible and hear someone else's story and look at someone else's culture for what it is and not what I think, nor should I want it to be.
There you go. There you go. I would say that is exactly the message that I've been preaching. For this 20 plus years. This is exactly the message that I've been teaching to my students, especially my Brazilian students, right? And this is one of the things that I've been preaching them. Now, I got some questions for you, Teacher Will. If you have,
yes, sir.
Yeah. I got some questions for you. I got some questions for you that I would like you just to help people to understand. This is something that I honestly believe. The reason why I want to get it on your perspective, it is because somehow along the years, I used to feel like I was a fraud because I was in a society that I somehow I felt like nobody was speaking what I was saying. And I remember like one of the first videos that one of my first YouTube videos, and I said one of my first YouTube videos was being a native speaker doesn't mean to have fluent English. And people wanted to lynch me. Oh,
oh, brother, don't use that word, brother. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Coming from, lynch. You know you and I know what it means, but
yeah.
Oh, I hear you. Oh, yeah. Well,
well, Teacher Will, people wanted to lynch me because he said, "What do you mean, Elder? What you're saying? No, but he's a native speaker." I will say, like, hey, being native doesn't mean to have a beautiful English, fluent English whatsoever. Doesn't mean it. People wanted to lynch me because people really believe just the fact that the person is a native speaker, he got okay. I say, hey, I am not a Brazilian, and somehow along the days, I have to correct Brazilian, with all due respect, Portuguese. On the process of on the process of teaching them, somehow I have to correct them their own language. So what I'm really saying is, it doesn't mean not just the fact that you are American, you are an American, you are British, you are Canadian. Somehow, language check, you are all set, you are all good, you're fluent, you got a beautiful English. And this is basically what I've been telling people, and people wanted to lynch me. What is your take on that, Teacher Will?
well, thank God you're not. Well, first let me say, thank God you're not lynched. Okay, so I would say it like this.
Thank
I
God
would
I wasn't. Thank
understand.
God I wasn't.
Really, I would understand where that sentiment comes from, and I could understand why you would have that reaction and why some people would think that. Because I do think that certainly a lot of learners out there believe, internalize, think as though that to sound like a native, have native accent, whichever one they think is appropriate for them.
Yeah.
They associate, and even for some learners to have, when they associate native, they think of a particular color. I understand where that comes from, particularly given the fact that if that is perpetuated as the standard, if that is perpetuated as superior, if they are told that from a very young age, if they live in cultures and societies where they're even told by their family members and or their close family members or in their cultures that, well, wait a minute, if you're speaking English and you don't sound native, they're ridiculed, they're bullied. So I definitely understand where that system comes from. And I have understanding and sympathy for that. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, for me, again, I normally say, just because I was born in the United States of America and happen to be a native speaker, I recognize that's a privilege, number one. I had no choice in terms of where I was born. You have to blame my parents on that. But I recognize that being a native is a privilege. But with that being said, some people like the way that I sound and not the way that I look. I say all that to say is that I think that learners have to, so I understand where that sentiment comes from. I could understand where you would possibly be ridiculed, where you would face discrimination, where people think that you were different, where you use the analogy of being lynched, because I think the thing is that for some learners that they might know that's true,
Mm-hmm.
yet they kind of will beat themselves up in the head because they don't want to accept it. I mean, at the end of the day, let me use this analogy, brother. You might understand what I mean. No one likes to be different. No one likes to feel like the other. And
Absolutely.
particularly, I think, again, as someone who speaks another language other than English, I think that what's interesting is a couple points. Number one is that the English Language Institute or the ELT industry, to me, is very fascinating. Where we will sit back and say, like, it's one of the very few. I'm not saying other languages don't have this,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
I think the English language and whether people learn English face to face, money, tutor, whatever. It's one of the languages that I know is like, oh my God, that native is standard and everything else is, there's a hierarchy to it. I mean, at the end of the day, if one makes the argument that racism exists in the world, then I don't think if racism exists in the world, then it's not omitted or eradicated from the ELT industry. So I understand where that sentiment comes from, but I think a lot of times why you might have felt discriminatory or use the analogy in lynch is because you're saying things that people might know to be true, but it's
Yeah.
very hard to accept
Yeah.
that. And I would think that um, ultimately, I will use it like this. Learners first as content providers, teachers, and then as learners. What I would say is learners have an opportunity to sit back and ask themselves, when they're learning the language, why they're learning the language. I believe in choices, right?
Yeah.
I believe in you give people information, you give choices. There are certain situations where, hey, you have to know why you're learning the language.
Mm-hmm.
Why is English important to you? And then given your individual situation, your country, your culture, you have a decision to make, or a learner has a decision to make that, hey, how do I navigate this world? For example, what I normally tell learners is it's like, listen, I think you said this as well, brother. When I'm teaching, I teach folks and I'm like, listen, it's about fluency. If you want to learn the language, you need to be fluent. And part of fluency is your pronunciation, your
Mm-hmm.
enunciation, your stress, your clarity, your confidence, understanding culture, like you're saying.
Yeah.
That for me is the foundation. That's the root.
Yeah.
With that being said, I'm well aware of the fact that so that for me is like, if somebody comes to me and says, oh, hey, teacher, well, you know what? I want you to tutor me, privately. I want American accent. And I'm like, listen, I'm not going to teach you American accent. I'll teach you how to be fluent and pronounce the words. With that being said, I then sit back because I live in a world that has certain realities that might not be my reality. So for me, it's about fluency and pronunciation. Then what I will have the conversation is I'm like, listen, if you need to sound a certain way or have a certain accent because you have to get a job or somebody's discriminating against you, okay, do that, but at least be fluent first. Because if you can't communicate, if you're not fluent, if you're not clear, it doesn't matter what accent you have. Number one. And number two, I will make at least some of my learners aware, have them take a look in the mirror and say, well, wait a minute, if accent is part of your identity and who you are, by the way, there's a difference, I think, oftentimes what happens that learners misconfuse accent versus pronunciation. But
There you
again, it's
go.
programming. It's
There you go.
programming, right? Because I would say to you, brother, you've been at this struggle and you've been at this, fluency mind, exactly right. It's a lifelong process. I mean, brother, if you're honest, or my sense of honesty is this, if you would poll most learners right now, they would still want to sound like a native. They still
Exactly.
wouldn't want native accent.
Let me
They
just
might
hook
not
on that.
admit it.
Let me just hook
I'm
it.
sorry, go ahead.
Hook on that. Let me just hook on that and say. Let me just hook on that and say. Um, as I always say, fluency. Talking about fluency, and one of the things that I've been preaching and telling people is that fluency is not it's not a destination. People are so naive. People are so naive, and somehow, some way,
They're banned, but no, no, no. Well, some are naive, brother. I don't mean to interrupt you. I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry, brother. Let me just say this real quick.
yeah,
Some people are naive. I respect that.
yeah,
But with all due respect, let's both be African brothers for a minute.
yeah.
They ignorant.
There
They
you go. Say that
bamboozled.
again, picture, Will.
and they're hoodwinked. They
Exactly.
ignorant, they bamboozled, and they're hoodwinked. I normally
Yes.
say to learners, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, ignorant. If you didn't learn your native language in 30 days, how you think you can learn English in 30 days? And then
Woo!
you're paying your money to people that don't have your best interests at heart. I normally say to people, I'm like, listen, because English has no color. Real talk, English doesn't have a color, it doesn't have a race, it doesn't have a nationality, it's a language. So
Yeah.
my thing is, I'm like, yo, learners need to wake up, stop being bamboozled, and if they choose to invest their money in language schools or private tutor, they have a right. But if people walk around respectfully, I know I'm your guest, I need to say something that might hurt a little bit. But if people walking around here thinking that, oh my goodness, that you need to walk around here sounding like a native, looking like a native, you will never be a native. And you know what? That's okay. But some learners are ignorant because they're trying to be something they aren't. And
There you
yes, with
go.
all due respect, they
There you go.
associate English with a particular accent and a color. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I'm used to being the only, brother, you're going to get me on this one.
Yeah.
I'm used to being the only chocolate chip and vanilla. So I have an experience that is different.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I do have understanding and sympathy with my brothers and sisters out there because that's most of the information they see. Brother, let's keep it real. Let's keep it real. Do you, and I have nothing, and I need to preface by saying this because this live is going to be recorded. I
Yeah.
have nothing against anybody out there on social media, any content provider that is doing a good work. I have nothing against, but there is a hierarchy within the language school. Fluency is the point. But listen, when learners, let me ask you a question. When you are looking at your content providers, the players,
Yeah.
do they look like Teacher or I? Do they look like most? The big people that have the big numbers or whatever like that, do they typically look like us? Do they
No.
look like you? The learner, you, do they look like you? And again, there's nothing against those individuals. And let me preface by saying that doesn't mean that they have not worked. Doesn't mean that they have not sacrificed. That does not mean that they're not aware. But my point is this. If content providers are only looking at English that has one particular color and one particular sound, and learners are trying to emulate that, and most of the time people are telling them, right, change your accent, fix your accent, then you know what? Your learners internalize that.
Yeah.
So I get the fact. But I'm like, really, learners? Wake up. You're being bamboozled. You're being hoodwinked. You're being taken advantage of. And if the learners woke up and realized, like, wait a minute, instead of saying, like, hey, you know what? Hey, let me work on my fluency. Let me work on my pronunciation. Let me work on my clarity first. And then if I want to have a particular accent, fine. But you got learners out there that will follow people that will tell them how they look and how they sound. They're less intelligent. That ain't nobody's fault. That ain't nobody's fault except the learners. Why? Because a lot of learners are walking around here thinking that they're less than, not proud of who they are,
Absolutely.
feeling like there's something the matter with them. And if you or others walk around there, oh yeah, you're a target.
You know,
You're a radical.
every so often, it is kind of crazy. Every so often, I do live in Brazil, right? I do live in Brazil, and it's a pretty interesting culture, all right? Every so often, let's say that I drop a video on YouTube. The first question that on the comment section that people go and say, excuse me, where you from?
Because you don't look like a teacher. You don't look what their image of a teacher is. Let's keep it 100, brother. You're not the image of what they think. You're not the image of what they think. Most people out there, again, let me preface by saying, nothing against my white brothers and sisters, but let's keep it real. My definition of real. My experience. You can't argue with my experience, learners. I'm just sharing my experience. Most of the time, people equate good English teachers as white males, white females from Britain, from Canada, from the United States of America.
Exactly. We don't look.
And they look at you and be like, "Oh wow, where are you from?"
Yeah, that's the question.
You're a teacher,
Yeah, go
or
Go
You're
ahead.
that articulate? Oh, really? You sound
Exactly.
so articulate.
Yeah, yeah. Go on my YouTube
Or
channel.
have you
I will say
experienced this one, brother? I can't. Oh,
pleasure.
really? I didn't think you spoke that well. Oh, wow, you speak really well.
That's what they say. Say, wow. Listen, are you African? Yeah, they even bias on me. Oh, but you don't sound like an African. Oh, but are you African? But you don't sound like them. I'm like, how am I supposed to sound like? How am I supposed to
Well, no,
sound
I mean,
like?
I
No
got that.
way.
I mean, I've heard that. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I got one time when I started first doing live Instagrams. They're like, "You're black." I'm like,
Oh, really?
I'm like,
Bye.
yes. They were like, "You don't sound black." And again, I understand where that comes from. So I'm not being, because I do think that sometimes it's fair. I mean, I do think what happens is that you always have to look the intent on the person, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I do think sometimes learners have an opportunity, or people, I like to ask questions. I'm like, well, what do you mean I don't sound black? Because again, I think that people, whether it's right or wrong, sometimes people have perceptions, bias, whatever. They perceive like a black person's only supposed to talk a certain way. But yes,
Mm-hmm.
brother, I'm sure that you got that. Like, oh, you're a teacher, you don't look black, or oh, you can really teach, or I mean, and I think that's the reality that all of us have. I mean, again, I think that the language English, it's a global English language. Teacher Milad says, oh, they want to hear black English. Well, wait a minute. Yeah. Let's talk about that for a moment, Teacher Milad. When
Yeah.
people say that, what does that mean? They want to hear black English. Well, wait a minute. I happen to be a black American or
Yeah.
African
Yeah.
American that's talking English that happens to be black. But again, here's what I would say it like this. That's a very interesting comment.
Mm.
Black English exists, just like Brazilian English exists, just like Omani English exists. But I think what's interesting about it is the interesting, and thank you for making me aware of this, Teacher Milan.
Yeah.
In my experience, in my opinion, that I would have to ask more questions, but I think at least the experience that I've had is that when people think black English, they're thinking ghetto, they're thinking slang, they're thinking acting like a thug or rapist. Like, real talk, I certainly have thought in my life, oh my goodness, how do I say this?
Bring it on. Bring it on. Bring it on.
I certainly think that there, and then this is nothing against my sisters that happen to be of African descent, but I certainly think that there's a vast percentage of people out there that when they think of a black male, nothing against my sisters, but I certainly think that when they think about a black male, they have a certain thought in mind. So what I would say is this. I've never tested this. Actually, I did test this once. I'm sure if I acted like what the majority of people thought I should act like as a black male or their perception of a black male, I'm certainly sure that my numbers on Instagram and YouTube would increase if I acted like what they thought that their interpretation or perspective of a black man is. I would say it like this. If I'm from Brazil, if I'm from Iran, if I'm from Saudi or any other, I think the diversity of manhood or blackness goes from 50 Cent
Mm-hmm.
to President Barack Obama or former President Barack Obama. But I think, when people say black English, I am speaking black English. No, first of all, I'm a teacher on social media, number one. I'm
Yeah.
educated with like 2 graduate degrees. And when I present myself, I'm presenting myself speaking English in a correct manner. I'm not, for better lack of terminology, with all due respect, and I'm sure I would get lots more hits on my videos if I acted like a thug or I acted like the N word. I'm sure I would get a lot of hits. Because
Yeah.
part of it is that, you know what, a lot of people on social media, they want to be entertained and not be educated.
There you go. Say that
Now,
again,
there are
Mr.
certain videos that I do that will entertain, but I made it known when I first started this social journey, I definitely made up in my mind, oh, no. I'm not going to act like
That
you
way.
want me to act. Because a lot of learners out there, there's not many of us. I mean, I'm not disregarding. I'm just talking from black male to black male for a minute. There are not many of us, and I don't care what any brother out there or black teacher, or African American teacher decides to do. I'm just talking about myself. For me, I made a decision that I'm like, you know what? I have to be me and I'm going to true to me. But I recognize and realize it's sometimes guilt by association. That
Yeah.
if I act like what y'all think me to act like, then you're going to expect that every other black teacher out there is supposed to act like that. That's something that I just choose to do. I'm not, and I want to be clear, everybody else can have, any other teacher out there can do whatever they want. But this man from America that happens to be of African descent, I choose to represent for who I am and for all of the ancestors that made a price and paid a price that I might have the freedom I have right now. What do I mean by that? Excuse my English 1 second, because I very use this word. I ain't acting like a nigga on a live Instagram as much as y'all want me to act like. It ain't happening. Not today, Satan. Not today. Not today.
Not today.
Was that too honest, teacher? I'm sorry. I know I'm your guest, but
Suit yourself, teacher Will. Suit yourself because I'm loving it. That's the message. That's the message that I preach. Every so often, people come to me and say, "Oh, elder, are you going to teach us the American English, or are you going to teach us the British English?" That is a common question every day. Yeah,
I get it, brother. How about let's just teach English? I mean, again, I understand it. How about let's just teach English? Let's just teach English. Let's just teach the foundations of English as it relates to grammar and vocabulary and phrasal verbs. And then after we get people comfortable with that, then we can talk about the differences between American English or British English. But what a lot of learners do is, oh my God, I want to learn American English. And I get it because, again, America's known for entertainment and stuff like that. Or I want to know British English. I'm like, learners, I'm sorry, not today, Satan. It's 2020. It's like 2020. Is it possible? You know, we're going into 2021, right? Like, is it possible that learners can, like, elevate their minds? Again, nothing to matter with preference. Like, if you want to sound like somebody else, no problem. But please don't discriminate against someone else. Please don't be biased against somebody else. Can we not? Like, learners need to wake up. The reason why, like, some people get away with the way that they do is why? Learners, you allow it. You allow it. You allow it. If somebody's going to call you stupid, less intelligent, because you don't have native accent, you sit back and you accept the oppression. And I'm just like, you know what? Not today. Not like, I'm not going to be like that. Like, I know for a fact, I don't know if teacher Halima's still here, but I had a conversation with her and I've thought about this myself. Oh my goodness. We all choose as content providers to sit back and we're on social media. It's a beautiful platform and we all have decisions to make. I did say to myself, you know what, if I played the game, and we all play the game to a certain degree, and what I mean by if I played the game being like, you know what, real talk, I could pimp out the fact I'm native. There are native teachers that I know, if you listen to their content, if you listen to their information, if you watch their content, they'll throw like pearls of oppression, have native accents, sound like, I could play that card in a minute. I could make learners feel small and less than. But I choose not to do that. There are native, and you know what? I'm sorry, learners, I'm going to go there. There are some native individuals, and you can follow whoever you want to follow, because you're an adult. There are some people that you follow right now that don't respect who you are, that don't respect your identity, that will tell you that you will pay courses for, that are black. I'm sorry, I got to go there. Black native teachers, white native teachers, Latino native teachers, Arab native teachers that will sit back and play the native card. And you know what y'all do? You just go buy. I could play that card. You just throw your money at them. And you can do that because that's what you want to do. I mean, that's your choice. You can spend your money. I know for a fact I could play that card. but I
Yeah.
choose not to. That's my choice. I'm not saying anybody else has to do that, but English, my methodology, my process, it's a global international language. And when learners wake up and be like, you know what? Bump this. It ain't about having an American accent. It ain't about having British accent. It's about me learning how to be fluent, be
There you
confident,
go.
and you know what? I'm going to call you out. Why aren't learners doing that? Why aren't learners sitting back when they're being discriminated against? Why aren't they calling out? Why? Because most learners are not comfortable with who they want. And that's why sometimes, brother, you and I, we're considered a threat, or we're considered outside of the norm, or we're considered like, oh, why? Because we choose, let me make an I statement. I choose not to play that part of the game.
There you go.
And I have to answer to that.
And when you say that you choose not to play that part of the game, some time ago I took a decision. Some time ago I took a decision of play neutral. I wanted to be a total neutral when it comes to, especially when you're speaking about, let's say, accent. One of the things that people tend to be a little bit intriguing the way I speak, even the way I speak. They say, I'm kind of, where you from, man? I'm like, but you
I love the way you
different.
speak. I
Yeah,
love the way you. We're all different, but that's the thing. We're all different.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
all
yeah.
different. Like again, everybody can. You can have. Okay, because listen, real talk. If I go on a job interview, for example, okay, now I was a native, right? Hold on. Yes, Malad, to your question, I agree with your question. Because I was born in America, I didn't grow up with the fact it's like, oh, you know what, you need to speak with this particular accent because I didn't. That was not my experience, so I respect that. I grew up with like, okay, listen, if you go on that job interview, you better sound the way they want you to sound, or you ain't gonna get a job because you know what, you're black. That's
Yeah.
my experience. So the only way I can relate to that is again by saying like, hey, listen, the reality is not perception's reality, it's real. There's a thing when people do private tutoring with me, I use this abbreviation and I say to them, ask. And the abbreviation is ask. It's appearance. Sometimes you have to have the appearance in terms of you have to look the part, you have to speak the part in the way in which they think. But that is still based on fluency and clarity and
There you go.
enunciation, right? Um, and I think sometimes what happens is that we have these terminologies out there where, you know, accent to me is the distinctive way in which you speak. Accent to me shows the diversity of the language. But
Yeah.
yet, how interesting it is
But
that you
also,
got
but
most
also,
learners trying to all sound one way. I
but
love the way
also
you sound.
how rich I am intellectually and linguistically speaking, because English is not the only language that I do speak. So I speak other
Right.
languages. Guess what? I sound the way I really want to sound, but at the end of the day, it's exactly what you say. It's about communicating. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So
And brother, to your point, when and see, this is a beautiful thing that I think that learners don't understand. And when we encounter different people or we're in different situations and we're in different cultures, we change our language based on that environment. And I think that's what people need to understand. That's why fluency and clarity is more important. Malab, would you say speaking like a native is a utopia?
yeah,
What I would say is that if you watch my video on YouTube, I think it's let me say it like this. I speak French, right? I will
yeah,
never be a native French speaker. Why? Because I wasn't born in a French speaking country.
yeah.
End of report. So I think that it is possible that certainly if one wants to try to be near native like and have the fluency and enunciation and the clarity, and then if he or she wants to have a particular accent for aspirational purposes or because they need to survive and live in a culture, that is definitely achievable. There's nothing the matter with that. The issue that I have is that when learners and the industry as a whole starts to discriminate or be biased because wait a minute, here's teacher Elder Tilden, well, wait a minute, he can't be a teacher because he don't sound the way that I think it should sound. That's the difference. And I think that learners sometimes respectfully
Yeah.
can be extremely hard on each other. Ricardo, you say that speaking like a native doesn't make sense. Brother, let me tell you something. It might not make sense to you, and I respect that. But I did a poll recently, about a month ago, and asked the ATW family. I was like, "Yo, if you want who wants a native accent?" And the ATW family knows what I'm like, yo, pronunciation, right? 53% of the ATW family said so. Brother Ricardo, that might not be, yeah, je parle français, je suis la langue pour 8 ans, je n'ai pas, anyway. But with that being said, is that a lot of learners out there don't do it. And again, I think it's just giving choices. I like the work that you do because it's kind of like, you know what? You've been spreading the truth for a while. All you can do is this. Like, brother, I normally tell people this. Like, I'm like, listen, you decide to be part of ATW, you decide to be part of the ATW family, here's what you need to know. English is a global international language.
Yes, it is indeed.
If you're going to come to this page, I don't care your race, your ethnicity, who you love, who you don't love, if you have a religion, don't have a religion. When you come to the ATW family, we trying to learn English and we talk about different things. If you don't like somebody because of something, if you hating a person, leave my page. I don't want you. I'll love you because I'm commanded to love you, but I don't need you. And that to a lot of people might sound rude. I'm not being rude. I'm like, that's the beautiful thing about social media.
Yep.
If you don't like me, go follow somebody else. That's fine. But I don't have time for players and haters. I want, my job on social media, hopefully, you'd have to ask the ATW fan. I want to motivate, inspire people to own the language. I want them to believe in themselves. If I'm able to do that, that's fine. And I normally say, my truth is my truth. I don't say it's the truth. My experience is it's my truth, my experience. You either like that or you don't. But what pains me as a human being, not black, not American, what pains me as a human being is you have a lot of learners out there that are walking around in pain, walking around in self-doubt, walking around with lack of confidence, walking around with lack of motivation, walking around in fear. Why? Because they're trying to be something that they aren't.
Yeah.
And then they program themselves and they watch content providers respectfully that don't give a damn about them. They will call them the N-word, the S-word, and every derogatory term outside. But when they get on that camera, they like, oh, yeah. That pains me as a human being. And so if I can give one person a thought where it's like, you know what, claim your power. Because here's the dealio, bro. You've been at this longer than I have. The power is within the learners. Every learner on this phone, they have the power. Every learner.
Yeah.
If they sat back and said no, it would stop.
Exactly. My take, my take and all that, for, whoever is watching us right now, whoever's going to be watching this video, I just want to leave a message for you. And what is my take in all that? We're talking about language and culture. And my take is what I told you, is exactly what I said to you guys a few minutes ago. You can never learn a language without understanding a culture. Don't worry about, because there is no global culture. There is the global language, but there's no global culture. A way to communicate with whatever the guys from China, from India, from Japan, from Korea, from Brazil, whatever the place might be, you need to enter into the person's culture, understand the person's culture in the way to create some sort of a way of communication. That's the message for me today. That is my take in all, whatever we're talking right now. That's my take, if you will. That is my take.
I love that. I agree with you 100%.
Yeah,
I agree. No, I think it's so important. I think it's so, one of the things, you and I have traveled and we lived outside of our countries, and I think, living where I live and then having the ability to travel, well, not now because of COVID, but, and by the way, COVID is real, people, so please, social distancing and masks. But with that being said, when I was traveling and had the ability to travel, I loved it because I think the thing is, by visiting in different cultures and, going on vacation, but more importantly, by living in a different culture, I think that it's made me have an appreciation, certainly for my own, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, it's definitely made me more human. It's made me question my biases, question my perspective about the world, and hopefully made me more human. Teacher Milad, the language can bridge the cultural differences. I think Um, I think that's one of the things that can. I think that language can build. I think that a language can bridge the cultural difference. But I think more importantly than a language, because for example, let's say for example, I live in China and I never learned Chinese.
Yep.
Doesn't necessarily mean I don't understand the culture. So I
Yep.
think that language is one component that can
There you,
uh,
there
build
you go.
that bridge. But ultimately, I think what, for me at least, it comes down to the fact of taking a look in the mirror, and it comes down to one's intent and
Mm.
looking at one's heart and looking at one's head. I think that what builds bridges more than a language, because we made this argument in the 1960s or in the United States. There's always a thing. It's like, what? Let's say you had the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the environmental movement, the gay rights movement, or whatever. There were some people that were for that and some people that were against it, and that's fine. They had their opinion. But somebody made a valid point. Laws are created, if you believe in laws, but laws are created to what? Hopefully change people's minds and hearts. So I do think that ultimately, if people want to have an understanding of a different culture, what I think is important is that they take a look in the mirror and question their own biases, look at their perspectives of what's important to them, and then they use language. But if I'm not going to look in the mirror and say, oh, you know what? I think this way because of the experience that I had, I think that's most important.
Yeah.
So that to me, Teacher Malad, I think is more important, where a person looks at you look at intent, you look at your life, and then you say, okay, can my head change and my heart change? Because there are people that I know that, that's too honest. There are some people that I know in my family or friends that I know back home, and even here. They would never think of themselves as a racist, but once you talk to them, their real ideas and thoughts come out. They might not be an institutional racist, but they are certainly an individual racist. So I think that's why it comes down to one's head and one heart.
Wow. I would say this to you, Teacher Will. Thanks for saving me. I had to bring my uncle with, and I had to bring a backup just to let people know that I'm not a fraud. I just
Brother, let
let
me
you
say
know,
this. I
you know
appreciate
what?
the compliment,
I'm
but you know
not a
what?
fraud, guys.
Listen, you were from. No, 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 no.
This is what we preaching.
Stop. I need to say this to you. You were from the motherland, number one. And number two
Yeah,
is you've been doing this for longer than I have. And I
yeah,
think, one of the, I don't share this a lot, but, I'm encouraged when, I see all different teachers out there, but real talk, I'm encouraged when I see a teacher that looks like me, because when I first started, I thought I was the only one, right? So I think what's important
yeah,
is
yeah.
that we save
That's
each
what.
other, and no, we save each other. And I would encourage you. I want to say thank you publicly to your work. I want to encourage the ATW family. If you haven't checked out his profile, definitely check it out. And not only his, but expand your horizons of what you think the English should be. I think it's possible to learn something from everyone. And
Absolutely.
I appreciate that, brother,
That's
because anytime I must
that's
admit,
one of your marks.
anytime I see a teacher, anytime I see somebody look like me,
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh,
Oh,
oh my God, wait, wait,
exactly.
so, but
Yeah.
no,
So
I mean, I
I can
think the
I can
thing,
relate. I can relate. I can relate. So I
no,
know
I think we
exactly.
can, no,
I
I
know
mean,
exactly
well,
how you feel. I know
there
exactly
are
how you
certain,
feel.
well, brother, sometimes you thinking you the only one out there, and then you see one, and
Yes.
you're like, oh my God,
Oh
it's
my
like,
God. Exactly.
but brother, let's be mindful, because okay, but let's stay true,
Yeah.
because I think this is important for learners to understand, because I think you're gonna understand. Just because somebody looks like you, don't necessarily mean they down. You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
there are a lot of people. I don't know how it is in the African
Yeah. Yeah.
tradition, but sometimes what happens is that we have a terminology in the African American tradition ain't the same. Keep me honest. I think you guys might have it in the Arab tradition as well, like crab in a barrel, meaning
Yeah.
that just because somebody looks like you,
You.
don't mean like they have your best interest in heart. And that's one of
Absolutely.
the things that I learned.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
um, But no, brother, thank you. And if you ever want to have me back on a live, it would be my
I'm gonna
honor.
bring you back.
It would be my pleasure.
Bring you back. I'm gonna bring you back. You know, and for all my family, yeah, and for all my Linga family right here, I just want to say, if you didn't check Teacher Will, please ask Teacher Will on Instagram, ask Teacher Will on YouTube channel, subscribe to his channel. He has an amazing, ridiculous, phenomenal content. I love the guy. Yes, I did. You know, he's my brother from another mother.
Brother from another, brother. Brother, do me a favor. Make sure, listen to me. Make sure you save the live and then tag me on it. And what I'll do is that before I go to sleep, I'll post it on my stories. So in case people don't want to share it or whatever like that, because I really believe that sharing is caring. So learners, listen, if you've got value about this, we talked about a lot of stuff. The last point that I would say is this. And learners, I want you to think about this. Language and culture. When you're learning English, ask yourself, can you, as my brother said, can you not understand culture? Can you even, but I want you to go a little deeper about that. I want you to ask yourself the question, when learning English, number one, can you leave your culture at the door?
Exactly.
And number two is that when learning English, how, as a global international language, how can English lead you, if you want to understand someone else's culture different from your own?
There you
So
go.
those are the two things that I would ask the learners to think about. Brother, it's been a pleasure. By the way, I love it. I love it. Is that Angolan or Brazilian? Is that Angolan or Brazilian?
I'm representing the motherland, brother.
Brother, mine's at home. Mine is at home. If I knew that you were wearing, mine's at home. I'm like, we gotta. When I go back to America for holiday, I gotta wear mine. It's amazing.
Represent the motherland, brother. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, man. Teacher Will, I have no words to express my gratitude. I just want to say, I hope to see you soon. All right. You know, let's do that again. Let's do that again sometime.
Definitely. Yeah, contact me next month. We'll do it next month or certainly beginning of the year. I'm down with that, brother. I'm definitely down with that. I mean that. I like to walk the walk and talk the talk. I believe it's like, ain't the same as one of my OGM family members. So she's been with me in the beginning. I just believe it's like, you know, it's giving people voices and not, and what I mean by this, you have a voice, so it's not me. I just think it's important that it's giving everybody voices. And so if I can use my platform or whatever, I believe in that. So yeah, definitely. Let's, you know what? I'm committing right. Hey, teacher, hey, Saeed, how are you? One of my students is on the phone. I'm committing right now, brother. January of 2021, let's do a live. Definitely.
Thank you, Teacher Will. Let's do that again sometime, anytime soon. I would love to have you back. Much obliged.
Have a wonderful night. Tell your wife I said hello. Continued blessings, all right? Take care.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for supporting. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ooh.